Brilliant. So, welcome back to the Share Impact Why Social Enterprise Summit. My name is Kat Luckock. I'm the host of the summit, and I'm really pleased to have David LePage joining us today from Accelerating Social Impact. So, welcome, David.
Thank you very much.
No, it's fantastic to have you join us. And one of the reasons I invited David to join the summit, and I'm really grateful for him taking the time out to do this, is because I know, David, you're involved heavily with the Social Enterprise World Forum that I attended earlier this year in Edinburgh, and I know that you are familiar with the social enterprise sector globally, but also in Canada, and I just really wanted to get that international perspective as part of this summit. So I wonder if, David, you could start just by introducing yourself and what you do at Accelerating Social Impact.
So I have to look at Accelerating Social Impact is really, it's similar to what your community interest companies are. It's a community contribution company, which is the hybrid model in Canada. But we started a few years ago, mostly as a model of whether or not this new model would work. So it's basically a tiny little company that I operate that does some consulting and supporting and some teaching and stuff, but so it's sort of a side piece. Is kind of interesting. The main things that I work on across Canada, one of them is Pan-Canadian, which is Bisocial Canada, which is so we have licensed from Social Enterprise UK the Bisocial brand. So we operate that across Canada, and that's really about how do we drive the purchasers to support social enterprise buying. And then the other project that I'm currently executive director of is called Community Impact Real Estate. And in Vancouver, we have Canada's second poorest postal code, but it's becoming a community that gentrified very quickly. So we set up a nonprofit social enterprise, and we lease 100,000 square feet of commercial space from a government crown corporation that does social housing. So we lease the retail and office space that is attached to their social housing, and then we use it in a mixed market portfolio. So some of the tenants are market rate, but 60% of the tenants are nonprofits or social enterprises. So we can use existing property to create opportunities for employment or goods and services for the low-income community. And with 100,000 square feet, we actually can help mitigate gentrification because we can ensure that there's a mixed economy in that neighborhood. So those are like the day things, Bisocial and teaching and consulting and the real estate. And then also very involved in the public policy agenda across Canada. Just completed serving on the Minister of Employment, Social Development, Social Innovations, Social Finance Task Force, which we made recommendations, sent them to government in August. And we're very pleased last week that the government of Canada announced $755 million social finance fund and a $50 million capacity building fund to support people getting ready. So that was a good announcement last week after years of work.
A really big win, I expect. So we'll look at all of those in a bit of detail then. So the public policy work that you've done and that kind of new announcement, is that a very new thing for the Canadian government to invest money into the social enterprise sector, or is it just adding to something that they've already been committed to?
So it's not new, but we had a period of when there was so in 2005, the previous Liberal government had put about 150 million into the social economy and other supports. And then there was a change in government and a lot of the cash went away, but some of the infrastructure stayed in terms of supporting some social enterprise activity. Like in 2013, they were supportive of the Social Enterprise World Forum in Canada. But it was really then again in 2015 when the current Liberal government came in that there was more interest in a social enterprise support. And that's where some supports came in for groups like Buy Social Canada, Social Enterprise Institute, an online marketplace. So some support for the ecosystem project we had developed. And then it was a year and a half or 2 years ago when they announced the creation of this advisory group to help them. But even early on in their government, they added to, like, every minister gets a mandate letter from the prime minister saying, here's what I want you to do over the next 4 years. The mandate letter for the Minister of Public Service Procurement Canada, so the Minister Qualtrough, she's responsible for buying everything. She was mandated with modernizing procurement, which includes adding a social component. So there's been leverage there for a number of years.
Which is really fantastic to hear, because I know that's something we've seen in the UK, the Social Value Act as well, an increased focus in at least public services, looking at how they can increase.
Yeah, this is actually for goods and services. And then this summer, they added a component. So in Canada, when there's a big infrastructure investment, it's usually 1/3 funded by the federal government, 1/3 because we have provinces. Like in Australia, states, or the US states, we have provinces, and then municipalities. So usually a big thing like a new bridge is going to be paid 1/3 by each level of government. The federal government actually signed agreements that said, if you want our money, you have to have a social benefit clause or an employment benefit clause, which again is a really great lever, because just last week a municipality called and said, what does this mean? What's a community benefit agreement? We have to do one. Can you help us? So it's interesting to watch that demand side sort of lead and draw people into it. And there's a lot of social enterprise activity at the provincial level. So the province of Nova Scotia has a very comprehensive ecosystem support for social enterprise. Quebec, which you may know, the Francophone province, has been for many years very, very supportive of the social economy, has a very strong infrastructure of supports and financing, etc. Ontario and has a strong development. They just funded something we're involved in called the Procurement and Investment Readiness Fund, which really is a fund to help social enterprises get ready for opportunities. Manitoba is very strong, especially in terms of some of their procurement activities in Winnipeg. In Alberta, I'm just going across the country for you. So in Alberta, we're working with the city of Calgary, who's looking at social procurement. Edmonton is exploring it. In British Columbia, Vancouver is advancing it. And then there's a real fascinating project we're working with on the west coast of Canada is Vancouver Island. And it's an island with about probably 40 or 50 tiny municipalities, the largest one, Victoria. They've procurement project over the next 2 to 3 years. So recognizing that in a very big country like Canada, every little community, some of them 600 people, some of them 5,000, can't do it on their own. So it's a real fascinating model for working in rural communities with remote and rural communities.
And do you see very different responses, I suppose, to the types of social enterprises that come out compared to social enterprises in cities and the communities that develop in cities compared to the rural areas? Because I imagine in the rural areas it's out of a need to provide services collectively and that lack of population, whereas there might be other issues.
And it's also because the markets are so tiny, right? You can't run like what you would run in the urban area. But there's some very interesting ways that communities are looking at those types, especially as some people retire that have been running the mom and pop shop. Their children are no longer there. So how do we use social enterprise for succession planning? So there's some of that going on. There's also just some essential services, like you'll find the cafe or the laundromat, which isn't about making money, but you're right, it's about a community service. And then there's always a challenge of keeping youth in the community. And a lot of the purchasing in remote communities is around things like road building and services. So trying to get more engagement from the construction industry to work and look at apprenticeships and employing youth so that there's some incentive for youth to stay.
Yeah.
In some of the remote communities, the industry is built around mining or some kind of resource extraction. So there's a lot of interest in looking at how do you do community benefits or how do you do services related to mining or resource extraction, especially many of the rural communities, Aboriginal and First Nations communities are creating community benefit agreements with the resource companies in order to create assets. Because 50 years ago, when you did these things, no one asked permission. They just came and laid a pipeline or dug a big hole. You can't do that anymore. Now it has to be a collaborative community effort. So trying to use social enterprise as a tool to create assets. So there's one rural community that we work with in Alberta near the oil extraction area. Well, they run a laundromat and they clean uniforms for all the guys who work in the drilling things. So since they had to get the uniforms from the little community to the mine, they had to buy a truck. So since they had a truck, they created a courier service. And since people were coming, they needed a hotel. So they built the hotel. So in a little community of I think maybe 5,000 people, they have created like 600 jobs for people with barriers. So it's really quite amazing. And it's all built around what are the opportunities of industry in their community.
No, and I think that's really exciting. And we've talked a lot over the first week of this summit about the innovation within the social enterprise sector. If it doesn't fall into one particular sector or industry. It's about really creating businesses in all sorts of different models that really help benefit a local community and keep or even bring in new wealth and, like you said, employment for local people. And keeping young people in those communities so those communities can actually survive as well. Because I imagine in some parts of Canada it's probably quite challenging for even some of those communities to continue if there's a lot of out-migration.
Yeah, there's the out-migration. There's also the markets are so tiny. There's just not enough people to buy things. But I think what's happening is the social enterprise is becoming more attuned to we need to have a market. So what is needed in the community as opposed to like, we have a social problem, let's start a social enterprise. Now it's combining those and saying, well, we have to solve a problem, but let's look at what we can do. So when you go to like rural Manitoba, they look at something called Aki Energy. Aki Energy works with First Nations communities. So in many of the rural areas, there's no power lines, right? So they run all their electricity off of diesel, which is not very efficient and all the oil has to be carried in. And if it's in a remote community, it's very expensive. So Aki Energy has started to do geothermal, which means they create a social enterprise in the community. They hire and train local people in the community to do the conversion, and they do a loan against your existing utility bill with the utility company, so it's not a big expense for the families. And they actually are having a huge environmental impact, a huge employment impact, and saving money for all the people using energy and making the community self-sufficient. So I think some of those things are the most creative. There's a problem and there's a social issue, and what's the business model that's going to solve that?
And I think that's a really important way to look at, how we create social enterprise in the future, because I'm not sure necessarily, certainly the communities I speak to online and then what I see to some extent that's going on in the UK, it's not always responding to market needs. It's kind of looking, like you said, about the how do we solve this social problem, and then kind of creating different things. So I think that's really an interesting approach and probably a much better approach think about how do we create market opportunities or respond to market needs, and that then have so.
We kind of discovered that 15 years ago and couldn't quite figure it out. Is we had a lot of people wanting to create employment and social enterprises going, oh, well, we'll create a employment social enterprise, which was a great idea. But if no one was buying their product or service, then it was just an imaginary business, because business can't work just on supply side. So that's when, I think in 2003, we launched the first social purchasing portal to try to create demand. And we had support from the tech sector, but the tech sector doesn't hire people with entry-level jobs. But we realized the tech sector buys a lot of stuff. So they buy catering, they buy couriers, they buy office cleaning. So we started to look at not who were the CSR, we started to look at their charity. That was nice. Their CSR was nice, but their supply chain was really what made social enterprise sustainable.
Yeah.
So when we started to look at this as not a social enterprise problem, but a marketplace issue, then we could start building up the infrastructure. So then we had to work on the supply side though too, because once you start telling someone, buy from us, you better be able to deliver.
Yeah.
So you've got a supply critical issue, but then you also, so bringing that, what I refer to as a social value marketplace, needs all those. That's why we spend so much time focusing, like last week's announcement about the social finance fund is great, but we need an ecosystem approach is one of our big issues, because financing by itself, like the social value act in the UK, without the other pieces around it, are nice components, but can't be as successful if we have all the pieces.
And is the Biosocial Canada, you're saying, is very similar to the Biosocial campaign here in the UK?
It's at this point, it's I think there's more private sector engagement in the UK around the current initiatives, where in Canada we're focusing at this point more on some of the government initiatives. The concentration of corporates in Canada is in Toronto. So we are, what day is today's Monday? Wednesday we're having a buying fair in Toronto, and we're inviting more corporates to try to get them involved. But in North America, they have a model called supplier diversity for their buying, which is more about the ownership. So they look at buying from women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses. So we're trying, and that's a long tradition that moved from the US to Canada, and corporates are comfortable with it. So we're trying to get social enterprises injected into their understanding. But most of the corporate activity is in Toronto. And so a large part of the economic driving outside of major metropolitan is really around government spending. So we're looking at where is the opportunity to really drive this. It's also like where there's, from a policy perspective and opportunity, that's where the opportunity is. So if the corporates step up, we'll drop the government and go. It's really where the opportunity is right now. And so as we grow it, we'll balance them both. But right now, most of the opportunities are really with the government sector, but as we encourage. But what's interesting is governments don't produce anything, right? So the opportunity is to use their buying to get into their supply chain, which is the private sector.
Yeah, no, definitely. And do you find that the private sector and corporates are, I mean, I appreciate it's at very early stages, but are they interested? Are they kind of responding well and positively?
Yeah, I think they're very interested. They don't quite understand how to do it because they have such a way of doing things that it's just like, why? Well, we do green and we do sustainable and we do ethical, and we're trying to say, well, those are all good, but the next evolution is social purchasing. So if we think about it, we said, well, 20 years ago you weren't doing green, you learned how to do that. So you moved from just price and quality to price, quality, and green. Now we're saying it's time to move to price, quality, green, and social. So then they're saying, well, how do you do that? And we say, well, that's where social enterprises come in. So let us introduce you to the social enterprises. So it's really, it is an evolutionary thing. And I think that's where SE UK and others are, unlike a lot of the work that Community Enterprise in Scotland did with their Ready for Business program, where really bringing those two sides together to understand, like, how do they start to intersect in the marketplace?
Brilliant. And do you find, because we actually spoke to Andrew Daly from Social Enterprise UK last week on the summit, and he was saying one of the challenges with meeting that demand that corporates or the public sector might have, or even kind of allaying some of their fears, and the realities of like many social enterprises aren't yet at the scale that they need to be certainly the primary supplier.
Yeah. So actually the supplier fair we're doing on Wednesday in Toronto is called Tier 2.
Yeah, brilliant.
Because we realize that Tier 1, the top suppliers, we're not going to have the infrastructure or the size that a corporate needs across all of Canada. But their primary suppliers have to have smaller and more localized services and goods. So we're actually targeting much more the Tier 2 and Tier 3 opportunities, because that's where the social enterprises fit more appropriately. And that still, though, requires the social purchasing, because what we're finding is if the corporate says we want a social component, their big suppliers are going to go looking. Because they want someone in their supply chain. So as an example, there's a casino was built in Vancouver over the last 5 years. And we were able to get into their requirements a community benefit agreement, which meant 10% of all employees and 10% of all purchasing had to come from the inner city. Well, when that's a requirement, all of a sudden the developer and the casino start to think differently and go like, how do we do that?
Yeah.
So it was not that they became social enterprises. So the casino did not change. But the developer started to look at groups like Embers, which is a social enterprise that does day labor on construction sites and really help scale them. By giving them all kinds of opportunities. They looked at working with Aboriginal youth to get them employment opportunities. They did all kinds of and at the end, of the construction phase, I asked the CEO of the casino, I said, would you have done any of this if there had not been a community benefit agreement? And he said, no, we would have gone to the cheapest and to our friends.
Yeah.
And now, during the operation of the casino, they have to buy 10% from locals. So they are doing things like buying some of their vegetables and greens from an inner city social enterprise that works with people with barriers. They're buying some of their fruits and vegetables from the Vancouver Farmers Market Direct program, which buys from local farmers and is an intermediary sales. So I think we're figuring it out that it isn't, we're not going to compete on that bazillion-dollar contract, but we are going to compete on this, the 100,000, the 200,000, that kind of scale where it's growing, and things like, and looking at the right types of supply, right? So you look at things like, cleaning, day labor, junk removal, catering. I mean, where there's really the right type of jobs, if we're doing employment, or where there's production, how do we get production online? So we're building an online marketplace in Canada so that there is one place where you can go and buy and find. But I think we're just getting much better globally at realizing we're working in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
We have to change the marketplace as opposed to expecting, the marketplace to come to us. We have to go to the marketplace, but at the same time, we have to change the value decision making in that marketplace.
And do you think kind of the fact that's businesses are changing because of that imposition on them, which I think is a positive and needed imposition in that they have to make those procurement decisions differently. But do you think that's going to have a long-term sustainable difference to their businesses? Do you think?
Yeah, I think
change their understanding?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is once people are almost, quote, forced into it, they then start to see the value. Mm-hmm. And as more and more companies are trying to identify themselves and they're hiring younger people, and younger people are saying, what kind of company are you? Are you a good company? And they say, oh, yes, here, we get this and we do this and we do this. And it's not just charity. It's not just corporate social responsibility. It's part of their supply chain. So it's not like, right, we all volunteer, on Thanksgiving for the food bank. It's like, well, that's nice. But millennials are figuring out that doesn't change anything. That's just nice activity. So they want to see the catering come from the, group that they used to bring turkeys or meals to. They want to say, no, they have a catering company. Let's get our, muffins every day from them. So I think we're starting to see that shift. And it's just like in the green movement, the environmental movement, people were resistant to it until they realized, oh, this is what we should be doing. Yeah. This is what a company does. And I think there's enough growing literature that people are starting to see that the current social service delivery model can't do everything. And when you look around internationally, you see the issues of homelessness, of youth unemployment, of immigrants being left out, social isolation. Even if people get a job, the communities are not together. Yeah. And so we're seeing the fact that it's not going to be done with a handout. It's going to be done when we change how business. And I think what social enterprise is trying to say is we're changing the way business is done. We're not just, right now, we're looked at as like these little guys who are over here on the fringes, like the Social Enterprise World Forum. We have 1,400 people show up, and this is like great success, and we've done 10. And you go to like other sectors, and that would be like a little tiny meeting, right? Yeah. But I think when we think about how influence happens, we think of like 10 years ago, the first Social Enterprise World Forum, there were a few hundred people. Mm-hmm. And we didn't have a sector, we didn't have relationships, it was an experiment. So when we talk about how we are trying to change the role of social enterprise, we're actually trying to change the way business is done. We're trying to change the marketplace from being something about economic transaction to really being how do we transform communities. Mm-hmm. When we look at social enterprise as a verb, not a noun, or social enterprise as a tool, then we start to say, okay, what are we doing here? We're not like, people say, oh, did you start another business? It's like, well, yeah, but it's like community impact real estate is another business. We rent space. Well, but those of us who are in the core of it realize it's really about community economic development. And it's about,
oh, sorry, go on.
It's really about changing the dynamic of the economics in the community.
Yeah, and that's been one of the really big things that's come out throughout the summit so far, is that social enterprise is really transformative and innovative and thinking about ways to change our current economic system, really, and the way that business is delivered and run, and for a future where we don't have inequality, where we don't have that social isolation, where we don't have huge unemployment rates or other social challenges, and also the environmental aspect as well, like bringing in those environmental thoughts into those, the way those businesses are delivered, which I just think is really exciting And I agree with you, it's going to take time. Change can't happen overnight. It's an evolutionary process that will develop as we go. You were mentioning there the World Social Enterprise Forum. Can you tell us, I know it's been going sort of for 10 years now, the conference, tell us a little bit more about how that got started, why you felt that was important to get that started, and how it's grown and developed over the last 10 years.
Yeah, so we really look at Jerry Higgins, who's the CEO of CEIS and the founder of Social Enterprise World Forum, who had built up enough, interests and friendships that started to say, well, wait a minute, maybe we should do something more than just have some sporadic friendships across the world. And so Jerry actually and the government of Scotland got together and said, okay, let's have a world forum. And he basically called people and brought people together. And I think all of us really recognize the role that he played. And the first meeting was in Edinburgh, and everyone said, we should do this again. And someone said, okay, well, next year we can do it in my country. And then it was designed and incorporated. So we incorporated as a community interest company and decided that what we would do is we would have a Social Enterprise World Forum in every continent. That would be our goal. So, of course, not Antarctica. Everyone gives me a hard time about that. But
yeah.
the penguins, the penguins weren't ready yet.
Yeah.
But so we did Australia, we did United States, and then we did Italy, and we did South America. And a couple of years ago, we said, well, okay, now we're getting near every continent and we're getting a different type of movement. So really decided that what we needed to be was not an event, but part of a movement, and that it was the Social Enterprise World Forum's kind of what we wanted to do is change it from an event to a movement facilitator. Mm-hmm. So the last year, couple years, and in the next few years is really a transition of the Social Enterprise World Forum from just being this event where we gather annually to being a part of building the networks and supporting the infrastructure and the ecosystems. So next year, October 2019, the working with the British Council will be in Ethiopia for the Social Enterprise World Forum, and then 2020 will be announced then. But it really is, we're still doing the event, but we're doing more regional stuff, but it's also, we'll be moving to actually having a half-time staff person. And again, we now have some corporate support from SAP International. So with the support of SAP and hopefully some other corporates moving forward and some support from government, we actually will not be just an event, but we'll actually be stimulating, and what you're doing, right? How do we start to build all these little pieces so they weave together, and it's not like, okay, once a year we get together.
Yeah.
And we say, okay, what did you do this year? But we're saying, instead of what you did this past year, we're talking about what are we going to do together in the future. And I think that is one of the most exciting things, is when we start to look at, and I think your conversations are very reflective of that shift, right? Of we're not looking at an event.
Yeah.
And we're not looking, this is a conversation, and it's a movement building, and it has all kinds of pieces.
But I think what the event really does, which is brilliant, is it brings people together that wouldn't otherwise necessarily get the opportunity together. It brings people that are maybe on the fringes to come and learn and listen and engage in some of the, local issues, which is brilliant. And it sparks conversations, doesn't it? And more activity, which I assume is what is really interesting to use throughout the year, is what actually happens as a result of that conference as well.
Yeah, we're not going to give up on the event, but at all. Because it also is a way we found to engage government, right? Because we had 40, how many countries there this year? 40 some countries. Then they bring different, and many of them bring government officials. We had, 15 government ministers. And so there's a real engagement from government, but also we're really driven by practitioners. And I think that's what's really different about the Social Enterprise World Forum is we don't focus so much on just the intermediaries. We really try to focus on the people who are running the social enterprises. So we're looking at, getting, the youth and the women and the guys who are running the social enterprises the opportunity to share their story, not because it's a story, but because they're changing lives. So, you were there, how we try to frame it. It's really about making the story impactful about how it's creating community. And I think that's what it's almost like the event is a celebration and encouragement and learning, but it's really trying to make the event more of a catalyst of how do we keep moving.
But I thought, I have to say, the event, for those people that didn't attend, was absolutely amazing, and I think is a huge credit to the amount of planning that must go into it, because to run an event of that size, that's international, is incredible. But it was a really, really, I thought, powerful event in terms of the content, the speakers, the way it was produced. Because lots of conferences, can be quite hierarchical, they can be quite dull, they can be like quite, oh, we've all heard this stuff before. But actually I thought the panels and the conversations that were happening on stages in different parts of the conference were actually all quite challenging, thought-provoking, pushing the boundaries of where we are. They weren't just kind of celebrating the success, they were actually exploring what are the challenges for the next 5 to 10 years in the social enterprise sector. And actually even beyond that, lots of speakers were talking about what is the future we're trying to create, and we need to think bigger and bolder about that, which I thought was really quite exciting as well.
Yeah, we really have to thank our secretariat, Jerry and Joanne Seagrave, and they work an amazing, and Helen, because we're all on different time zones, as you know.
It's not easy.
It's really quite, I'm just always impressed because they are working around the globe as well, and coordinating and getting people ready and getting the panels to do their preparation. So, no, I think it's really an amazing commitment from some members of the board who get involved in the program content, and others who get involved in the marketing and promoting it. When you think about the fact that there were bursaries from New Zealand, or bursaries from Australia, bursaries from Canada, the Taiwan government brought like 70 people. That all comes from not only building the relationships, but maintaining the relationships, but also they wouldn't come back unless that content was strong, right? So when you have that combination, and I think the biggest factor, or one of the biggest factors, really is a very strong secretariat. Jerry and his team, great leadership. And then you've got people, like SEUK, Peter Holbrook, and others who are very involved in supporting this, and then very strong partnerships across the board of SEWF. So, like Jim Shore in the US, and David Brooks in Australia, Helene in New Zealand, and Dr. Kim in Korea, by keeping the board international. And, like Elena in Italy and Paula from the British Council, we kind of try to make sure the board are the people who are interested in pushing this forward as well internationally. So I think it's a combination of trying to create a group of people and the secretariat that share a vision. And when we share that vision, it makes it much easier to make an event happen that is more than just, like you said, oh, well, we went to another conference and listen to some speakers, and yeah, they were okay.
Yeah.
It's really our ambition to get the reaction you had. So
yeah, good. Well, no, I definitely had it, and it was brilliant. And I often, whenever I go to conferences, very skeptical. So you definitely challenged me, which is good. I'm interested then, you've been involved with the Social Enterprise World Forum, and obviously you're just your experience across the sector for a long time. What have been the kind of key changes that you've seen in the world of social enterprise over the last 5 to 10 years that you think is positive?
I think some of the biggest changes, the relationships in the with business, and
Mhm.
recognizing that social enterprise is working in the economy, that it's not kind of tagged on, but that it's really an influencer. And I think what's shifted is, I think a lot of people 5 and 10 years ago started to say, oh, social enterprise, that's how I'm going to solve this problem, or social enterprise, that's the new thing, I'm going to do that. I think it has now begun to mature, not in terms of just impact, but just in understanding what a successful social enterprise is. So it's not, some of them are very tiny and really successful, and nobody says the only success is huge. We're starting to say, well, if you are in a tiny community and doing something small, or if you're doing something that is impactful, it's not just about scale. But on the other hand, we're also realizing if we're going to have impact, we've got to have bigger as well. So I look at groups like the DC Kitchen in Washington, DC. They used to do, 10 or 20 people got jobs. Now they're at like thousands. I look at Embers, the day labor company here in Vancouver that works with people with barriers, gets them on construction sites, gets them back to work, whether it's recovering from addiction or coming out of prison or just people who can't work every day. But they looked at the market and they said, wow, there's all these people with barriers who are going to work in day labor, but they're treated really poorly, they're not paid well, and they're cheated. So what happens if we create a social enterprise that really sees this as a means of transition to support people? Well, I think today, they probably will have over 300 people working. But the impact is not only economically, they're very successful, self-sustaining, investing in growth, investing in new locations. But when you go and talk to the people who work there, and you see the stories of people's lives change, I think that's the difference, is we're understanding it isn't just social, connected to business, or it isn't just business with a social. It's really this blended value that we're trying to create. And to be successful, you have to be good at both. And I think that's maturity, is when you start to meet the people who are running social enterprises. They're amazing business people with a whole different purpose.
Yeah.
It's not like I run a business and I do some good stuff. It's like the difference between, what I call social value investing and social impact investing. Social impact investing is, yes, I make a bunch of money and I do good. Social value investing is, I'm driven by the fact that I'm creating social value with my investment. I'm going to get my money back, but I'm not in it because I'm going to measure it by just the financial success that happens to do some good. So I think what we're doing is maturing in our understanding of what is success. And we're understanding that it's not just market success or not just social success. It's like when we can tell this really blended story of like, wow, but also at the same time, we're shifting the marketplace. So what Embers is doing, or what DC Kitchen is doing, they're changing what catering means. Right? DC Kitchen, it's like, okay, catering is no longer just you buy food. It's like, oh, you buy food, you change lives. Oh, you look at what happens with the waste. Oh, you look at what happens where you bought stuff. And it's like changing the very fabric from where businesses come in the last few hundred years of the value we measure is economic value. We're now saying the value we value is community value. And that is a tremendous shift in the world.
And I think that's what's really exciting about it, because of those changes that are happening, and the influence that it's starting to have. Like you said, it's kind of, you'll have the social enterprises, and all businesses might not become social enterprises. We're changing the way ordinary traditional businesses are operating as well, because of the way we're engaging with them and kind of providing some services and products, and encouraging them to think differently through, even if it is imposed at the moment, thinking through how they do their procurement differently.
Yeah, or even like Embers, Marcia, who runs it, was telling me, is like, there was one company, they said, oh, right, we want to work with you. You have better workers. It's not because they're a social enterprise.
Yeah.
No, you just have the best workers. We like you guys. Oh, okay. Eventually,
you'll think, the investment that they take in people. They care about people, don't they? So it has.
So, but it's interesting to see, like, why do I buy from you? Yeah. Because you're the best workers, and then it's like, oh, and you're doing some good too. But eventually, they'll understand.
Yeah, no, definitely. Brilliant. Well, the last question then that I'm asking all guests on the summit, David, it's been brilliant talking to you, is, and I suppose we've probably already answered a little bit of this, but what really excites you and what have you got hope for the future in terms of social entrepreneurship around the world?
I think pretty much what we've been talking about is seeing the shift from, we don't talk about what is the definition of social enterprise, or we don't, get into like, the pieces of it, where I think the fact that we're now starting to look at it from a systems perspective, that we're starting to understand, yes, it is a business with a blended social value, or it's a social value with a business, but we're starting to look larger and how it's impacting the economics. And as we see the issues that are so now globally impacting people in terms of income equity distribution or social isolation, we realize that, and the climate change, and these are like amazingly challenging and potentially globally devastating issues. And I think we're starting to see social enterprise as a way of revisioning how we address community. We've isolated community from business in the last few hundred years, and we've let business do things that have no connection to where we live or how we live or how we live with each other. And I think when we start to say, no, you can't separate the marketplace. And in North America, when you look back a few thousand years ago, the indigenous communities traded to create community. I mean, different communities had different goods or service goods, and the anthropologists now are finding all those traces that thousands of years ago people traded so that we both could have good lives. Somehow we lost that, and we thought trading had to extract a value. And now we're trying to say, no, trading is how we all are happier, but we can also build into that trading a social value. So we're really building community as opposed to just building economic wealth.
Yeah. No, that's really great. I really like that. Thank you very much for sharing that. So thank you so much for your time, David. It has been brilliant talking to you. We'll get this shared with everybody that's joined and signed up to the summit. And then I hope we get to speak again sometime soon.
Great. And we'll see you in Ethiopia for sure. Eh?
Fingers crossed.
Okay. All right.
Go to that. Thanks very much.
All right. Bye.
Bye.